second round, and I'm going to start, and I guess I'm going to focus on the issue that I think Senator McCain has just touched on, and Senator Langford, which is HHS unbelievably taking this position that somehow you're not responsible for these kids once they leave the detention facilities. You release them to a sponsor. Basically, you're saying, we have no more responsibility. You've taken that position even though federal law, as was just quoted, says that responsibility for care and custody of all of these unaccompanied minor kids rests with HHS. And even though Congress has mandated that HHS actually provide post-release monitoring in some cases, specifically, and even though there's a judicial decree that governs this program, also known as the Flores Agreement, in response to Senator Langford's questions, Mr. Greenberg and Mr. Kerry, your response was, well, the Flores Agreement requires us to get these kids out the door. That's basically what your response was. Let me just make it absolutely clear. The Flores Agreement does not authorize you to cut corners, period. It clearly states that HHS should place children with a family member or a family friend who is, quote, capable and willing to care for the minor's well-being. That's in the Flores Agreement. That's a quote. It also says, of course, that under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, that you're forbidden from releasing any unaccompanied alien child, quote, unless the Secretary of HHS makes a determination that the proposed custodian is capable of providing for the child's physical and mental well-being. So this notion that you're going to hide behind the Flores Agreement or federal law, to me, is you shirking your responsibilities. It's clear that HHS is not permitted to skip reasonable precautions that are necessary to make the determination that's provided for under law, specifically, and under the Flores Agreement. To me, I guess that's the biggest concern that I have after today's hearing, is that despite our work, the work of others, the AP investigation, the back and forth we've had with you for 6 months on this, that you continue to think that somehow your legal responsibilities don't continue after you place a child. Let me ask you this question. Has HHS ever terminated a sponsorship agreement for failure to properly care for a child and resume custody of that child? Have you ever terminated a sponsorship agreement?
Not that I am aware of.
Mr. Kerry?
Not that I'm aware of.
So out of tens of thousands of kids, you have never, including in this case in Marion, Ohio, when those kids were living in that trailer with a bunch of adults, debt labor, you have never terminated an agreement.
So, Senator Portman, if I can respond more fully, our view that we don't have continuing custody after we release the child is a long-standing HHS view. It was the view before I got there. I'm happy to take it back to the lawyers and ask them about it again. But it's also, if this is an area where Congress wants the law to be different, Congress should change the law.
The law already says that, and the Flores Agreement already says that. Have you read the Inspector General's report on this? It dates back to 2008. 2008. Have you read that report?
I'd have to go back and check.
Well, the Inspector General of HHS recommended that if there was any doubt about this, that HHS and the Department of Homeland Security should enter into a memorandum of understanding to clarify, quote, which department is responsible for ensuring the safety of children once they are released to sponsors, and which department is responsible for ensuring sponsors' continued compliance with sponsors' agreements. Have you read that? Have you read that report?
I don't recall reading that, Senator.
I would encourage you to read it. HHS has had quite a long time to think about it. It dates back 8 years.
So,
after these 8 years have passed, without any final action on your part to clear up this basic question about HHS versus DHS, these kinds of conditions are present. This is the result. Never having terminated a sponsorship, despite some of these horrific conditions that we're talking about today. I would tell you, you've missed opportunities one after another. I talked about that in my opening statement, but this is certainly the biggest one, is just not taking responsibility and not doing any kind of appropriate oversight. You talked earlier about the fact that you have these home visits. We've looked into this, and we heard that home visits were something that you did. You gave us some numbers on it. We looked at your own numbers, and we found out that it was only 4% of the cases. 4% of the cases. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding, yes.
4% home visits. It's no wonder you have these kinds of problems.